The people who change your life rarely arrive with a warning. Sometimes, they look like someone everyone else has already given up on. The cold November wind swept through the downtown bus terminal, carrying scraps of paper across the cracked pavement and rattling the loose metal panels overhead. Commuters hurried past with their heads down, shoulders hunched against the weather, each person focused on getting somewhere warmer. Sarah Parker tightened her grip on the faded backpack hanging from one shoulder as she stepped off the city bus. Her feet ached after 10 hours on the checkout line at a grocery store. Her lower back felt stiff, and all she could think about was getting home to her 5-year-old son. Noah was waiting at the apartment with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jensen. The babysitting arrangement wasn't ideal, but when you were a single mother trying to stretch every dollar, ideal wasn't a luxury you could afford. Sarah checked the time on her phone and felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. The rent was due in 6 days. Noah's asthma medication needed refilling, and her checking account balance sat stubbornly below $200. She exhaled slowly and started toward the sidewalk. One step at a time, one day at a time. That was how she survived. The station was crowded, yet somehow nobody seemed to notice the old man sitting alone near the far bench. At first, Sarah didn't notice him either. Why would she? Hundreds of people passed through the terminal every hour. Most became part of the background. But then she saw something that made her slow down. The man's paper coffee cup slipped from his hand and rolled across the concrete. He didn't react. His head tilted slightly forward. His shoulders sagged unnaturally. Something wasn't right. Sarah glanced around. Surely someone else saw it too. Yet people kept walking. A businessman talking loudly into a headset stepped around him without looking. A young couple passed by while staring at their phones. A delivery driver pulled a cart nearby and continued on his way. Sarah hesitated. Noah was waiting. The next bus connection home left in 12 minutes. Missing it meant another 45-minute delay. She should keep moving. She knew she should. Instead, she turned around. The old man's silver hair fluttered in the wind. His coat looked worn but clean. He couldn't have been homeless. Maybe lost. Maybe confused. Maybe simply exhausted. Sarah approached carefully. "Sir?" she asked. No response. "Sir, are you okay?" The man blinked slowly. His eyes opened halfway. For a brief moment, she saw confusion there. Then exhaustion. Deep exhaustion. "I'm fine," he murmured weakly. The answer arrived too slowly. His voice sounded strained. Sarah crouched beside him. "I don't think you are." The old man attempted a smile. "My daughter used to say the same thing." His words drifted away with the wind. Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to worry her. "Do you have someone I can call?" she asked. He stared toward the street as if searching for an answer. No. The response felt heavier than the cold air around them. Sarah looked toward the departing buses. She looked back at the old man. Then she made her decision. Pulling out her phone, she called for medical assistance. While waiting, she removed her own coat and draped it gently across his shoulders despite the temperature. The old man immediately noticed. "You'll be cold," he said quietly. Sarah smiled. "I've been cold before." For the first time, he looked directly at her. Something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Not gratitude exactly. More like disbelief. As though kindness had become something unexpected. Something rare. Minutes passed. Cars moved through the intersection. The city continued around them. Sarah remained seated beside a complete stranger while everyone else rushed toward whatever seemed more important. "You should go home," the old man finally said. "Your family is waiting." Sarah blinked. "How did you know I have a family?" A faint smile appeared on his weathered face. "Because people who stop for strangers usually do." The words lingered between them. Simple, honest, almost painful in their truth. In the distance, emergency lights appeared at the end of the street. Sarah felt relief wash through her. The old man's eyes followed the approaching vehicle before settling on her once more. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but the sirens grew louder, drowning out her voice. And somehow, neither of them knew that this ordinary evening, this forgotten bus station, and this chance encounter between a struggling single mother and a lonely old man would quietly begin changing all of their lives forever. The ambulance doors closed with a soft metallic thud, and Sarah stood on the sidewalk watching the flashing lights disappear into the evening traffic. For a moment, she remained frozen beneath the glow of a street lamp, her sweater offering little protection against the cold now that she had given away her coat. The wind cut through the fabric, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She kept seeing the old man's tired eyes and hearing his quiet voice. People who stop for strangers usually do. The words followed her all the way to the next bus stop. By the time she finally reached her apartment building nearly an hour later, the hallway smelled faintly of old paint and someone's overcooked dinner. Sarah climbed 3 flights of stairs, her legs heavy with exhaustion. Before she could unlock the door, it swung open. Noah launched himself into her arms. "Mom," he shouted. "You are late." Sarah laughed softly despite everything and hugged him tightly. "I know, buddy. I am sorry." Mrs. Jensen appeared behind him with a warm smile. "Everything all right?" she asked. Sarah hesitated. "I helped someone who was not feeling well." The elderly woman nodded approvingly. "Then you were exactly where you needed to be." Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Sarah sat alone at the small kitchen table reviewing bills. The numbers never seemed to change. Rent, utilities, medication, groceries. Every month felt like a puzzle missing pieces. She rubbed her temples and reached for her calculator. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. The balance staring back at her was lower than she hoped. Much lower. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She could worry tomorrow. Tonight she simply wanted sleep. Across the city, however, another man was finding it impossible to rest. The old man lay comfortably in a private hospital room, watching rain streak down the dark window beside his bed. Nurses moved quietly through the hallway outside. Machines hummed softly. Everything around him was calm, yet his thoughts remained fixed on a young woman he had met only hours earlier. "Sarah," he murmured to himself after finally remembering the name he had barely heard over the sirens. The door opened. A doctor stepped inside carrying a tablet. "You gave us quite a scare tonight, Mr. Harrison." Robert Harrison offered a faint smile. "I suppose I did. You were fortunate someone stopped to help." Robert's gaze shifted toward the window again. "Yes," he said quietly. "Very fortunate." The doctor reviewed several test results before leaving him alone once more. Robert folded his hands across the blanket. For years, people had treated him differently because of his name, his wealth, or the company his family controlled. Employees smiled because they recognized him. Business partners agreed because they wanted something. Strangers often saw opportunity before they saw a person. But Sarah had not known any of that. She had simply seen an old man sitting alone. And she had stayed. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Sarah rushed through her usual routine, helping Noah get dressed, preparing breakfast, and walking him to school before heading to work. Life moved forward exactly as it always did. She assumed the old man was recovering somewhere and that she would never see him again. Meanwhile, Robert sat in his hospital room staring at a business card one of the nurses had handed him. It belonged to his son. The number was familiar. He could call any time. Yet he hesitated. Not because he doubted his son would come. Ethan Harrison always came when family needed him. The hesitation came from a different thought. Robert found himself wondering whether fate had placed someone special in his path for a reason. Outside his hospital window, clouds drifted slowly across the skyline. Inside, a small smile touched his face as he remembered the young mother sitting beside him in the cold, completely unaware that her simple act of kindness had already begun setting something extraordinary into motion. 3 days passed, and Sarah almost forgot about the old man at the bus terminal. Almost. Life had a way of demanding her attention before she could dwell on anything for too long. Every morning began before sunrise. Every dollar already had a destination before it reached her account. Every decision felt connected to Noah's future. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah was stocking reusable grocery bags near the front registers when her manager called her into the office. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as she stepped inside. Her stomach tightened immediately. Nobody liked being called into the office unexpectedly. "You are not in trouble," her manager, Linda, said with a reassuring smile. "Relax." Sarah exhaled. "Okay, that is good to know." Linda slid a piece of paper across the desk. "A customer left this for you." Sarah frowned. The paper contained nothing but a phone number and a short handwritten note. "Thank you for your kindness. Please call if convenient." Sarah stared at the message. "Who left this?" Linda shrugged. "An older gentleman. Very polite. He said you helped him recently." Sarah's mind immediately returned to the bus station, to the cold wind, to the tired eyes. to the old man sitting alone. Did he leave a name? She asked. No. Linda smiled. But whoever he is, he seemed very grateful. For the rest of her shift, the note remained folded in Sarah's apron pocket. She touched it several times without realizing it. Curiosity tugged at her. Still, she hesitated. People rarely entered her life without wanting something. Experience had taught her that. That evening, after Noah finished his homework and fell asleep on the couch beside her, Sarah finally dialed the number. It rang twice. Sarah? Came the familiar voice. Warm, gentle, slightly amused. She immediately recognized it. You are the man from the bus station. A soft chuckle answered. And you remembered me. You left a note at my work. I did. Sarah leaned back against the sofa. How did you even find me? You mentioned the grocery store while we were talking. Robert paused. I hope you do not mind. Somehow she did not. How are you feeling? She asked. Much better. The doctors insist on reminding me that I am not 25 anymore. Sarah laughed. I think doctors say that to everyone. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. Longer than either expected. They talked about ordinary things. Weather. Noah. Robert's love of old jazz records. Sarah's dream of someday owning a small bookstore. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing. Yet when the call ended, Sarah realized she was smiling. Across town, Robert ended the call with the same expression. The following afternoon, a black luxury sedan quietly pulled into the circular driveway of a private hospital. The driver stepped out first. Then a tall man emerged from the rear passenger door. Ethan Harrison moved with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed. At 39, he had spent more than a decade building Harrison Technologies into one of the country's most successful software companies. Business magazines called him visionary. Investors called him brilliant. His employees called him demanding but fair. Yet none of those labels mattered as he entered his father's hospital room. You should have called me sooner, Ethan said. Robert looked up from his chair near the window. And miss your dramatic entrance. Ethan shook his head. You scared me. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Robert smiled. I met someone. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. Not like that. Robert laughed. A young woman. Ethan pulled up a chair. What kind of young woman? Robert's gaze drifted toward the city skyline beyond the glass. The kind who stops when everyone else keeps walking. Something in his father's voice caught Ethan's attention. The old man rarely spoke with such conviction. She helped you. Robert nodded slowly. She reminded me that kindness still exists. Ethan studied him carefully. During the past year, he had watched his father grow quieter, more withdrawn, more isolated. Yet now there was a spark in his eyes that had not been there in months. What is her name? Ethan asked. Robert smiled. Sarah Parker. Neither man realized it then, but the simple mention of that name would soon begin, weaving their lives together in ways none of them could possibly imagine. The first snow of the season arrived 2 weeks later, dusting rooftops and sidewalks in a thin layer of white that transformed the city overnight. Sarah stood outside Noah's elementary school, pulling her scarf tighter as children poured through the front doors. Noah appeared carrying a construction paper snowman and immediately started talking before he even reached her. Mom, Mrs. Carter says we might get enough snow to build a real fort this weekend. Sarah smiled. Then we better hope the weather cooperates. Noah grinned and slipped his small hand into hers. Moments like these made everything else feel lighter. The bills, the long shifts, the constant worry. For a few minutes, she could simply be Noah's mother instead of someone trying to solve 100 problems at once. Across town, Robert Harrison sat comfortably in a leather chair near the fireplace of his home, speaking with Sarah on the phone for the third time that week. What had begun as a simple thank you call had gradually become a friendship neither of them expected. And then Noah informed the entire grocery store that I make terrible pancakes, Sarah said, laughing. Robert chuckled. Children have a remarkable talent for honesty. You mean embarrassment? That too. Ethan paused outside his father's study as he returned from work. Through the partially opened door, he heard laughter. Real laughter. Not the polite kind his father offered at business dinners or charity galas. This sounded genuine. It stopped him immediately. Over the past few years, silence had become Robert's closest companion. Since losing his wife nearly a decade earlier, the house often felt too large and too quiet. Yet recently, something had changed. Ethan knocked lightly before stepping inside. Robert looked up. Speak of the devil. Ethan smiled. Who has you laughing? Robert glanced at his phone. Sarah. Ethan noticed the name again. Sarah Parker. The mysterious woman his father seemed unable to stop mentioning. You talk often. Robert's eyes twinkled. Perhaps because she treats me like a human being instead of a family asset. Ethan laughed. Softly. That bad. Worse than you think. Robert ended the call and set the phone aside. You should meet her someday. Ethan loosened his tie and sat across from him. I thought you said she did not know who you were. She does not. And you plan to keep it that way? Robert leaned back thoughtfully. For now. Ethan studied his father carefully. The old man looked healthier than he had in months. More energetic. More present. What makes her so special? Robert did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the flames dancing behind the fireplace glass. When someone helps you because they expect something in return, you can feel it. His voice remained quiet. Sarah stayed because she cared. There was no audience. No reward. No advantage. Ethan nodded slowly. That is rare. Exactly. Meanwhile, Sarah's own challenges continued piling up. 3 days later, her aging car refused to start in the apartment parking lot. She sat behind the wheel turning the key again and again while the engine stubbornly clicked without coming to life. Noah watched from the back seat. Is the car sick? Sarah forced a smile. Something like that. The repair estimate arrived that afternoon. $1,100. Sarah stared at the number in disbelief. It might as well have been 11 million. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by receipts and unpaid bills. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Noah had already fallen asleep. Snow drifted past the window outside. Sarah rubbed her eyes. For the first time in months, tears threatened to appear. Not because of the car itself. It was everything. The constant pressure. The endless balancing act. The fear that one unexpected expense could unravel everything she had worked so hard to hold together. Her phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen. Sarah considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, she answered. Rough day. Robert asked immediately. Sarah laughed weakly. Am I that obvious? Only to someone who has had a few rough days himself. For the next 30 minutes, they talked. Not about money. Not about problems. Just life. Stories. Memories. Small things. Somehow, when the call ended, Sarah felt lighter than before. Hundreds of miles away, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse office reviewing financial reports. Yet his thoughts drifted unexpectedly toward the woman his father kept describing. A struggling single mother. A grocery store employee. A stranger who had somehow brought life back into Robert Harrison's eyes. Ethan did not know much about Sarah Parker yet, but for the first time, he found himself curious. And curiosity, he would soon discover, had a way of changing everything. The following Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and fresh snow sparkling beneath bright winter sunlight. Sarah stood outside Noah's soccer practice wrapped in her thickest coat, watching children race across the frosted field while parents gathered along the sidelines with steaming coffee cups. Noah was laughing so hard, he nearly tripped over the ball. Moments like these reminded her why she kept pushing forward no matter how difficult life became. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. A message from Robert appeared. Would you and Noah like to join me for lunch tomorrow? Sarah smiled before typing a reply. Only if you promise not to tell embarrassing stories about me. The response arrived seconds later. No promises. The next afternoon, Sarah and Noah arrived at a small family-owned diner on the edge of town. It was one of those places where the booths had been there for decades, and the waitresses knew half the customers by name. Robert was already seated near the window. Unlike most men his age, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed impossible to define. Noah immediately ran over. Mr. Robert. The old man laughed warmly. There is my favorite soccer star. Sarah watched them together with amusement. Somehow the friendship between her son and Robert had developed almost as naturally as her own. During lunch, Noah talked nonstop about school, soccer, and a science project involving volcanoes. Robert listened with genuine interest. Not once did he glance at his phone or seem distracted. He simply listened. Sarah noticed something then. Many people claimed children were important. Very few actually gave them their full attention. Robert did. After lunch, Noah excused himself to visit the restroom. The moment he disappeared, Robert leaned forward slightly. You look tired. Sarah laughed softly. I thought I was hiding it well. You were not. She stirred her coffee. The car repairs are expensive. Christmas is coming. Life keeps happening. Robert nodded. And yet you keep smiling. Sarah looked out the window toward the parking lot. Somebody has to. For a brief moment, Robert's expression softened. He saw the same quiet resilience that had impressed him from the very beginning. She never complained, never asked for help, never treated hardship like a performance. She simply carried it with dignity. Later that evening, Robert sat in the library of his home while Ethan reviewed documents across the room. The crackling fireplace filled the silence between them. I had lunch with Sarah today, Robert said casually. Ethan looked up. The famous Sarah. You joke, but I am serious. Ethan smiled. I know. Robert studied his son carefully. You should meet her. Ethan leaned back in his chair. You have mentioned that before. And I will continue mentioning it. Why? Robert's answer came without hesitation. Because she is exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. Ethan was quiet for several seconds. Then he closed the file in front of him. All right. Robert blinked. All right. Introduce us. The old man's eyebrows rose slightly. Ethan rarely agreed to anything without extensive debate. That was easier than expected. Ethan laughed. You have spent weeks talking about her. At this point, I feel like I already know her. Neither man realized how quickly that introduction would arrive. The very next morning, Sarah's manager approached her near the end of her shift. Sarah, one of our regular delivery drivers called out sick. We need someone to drop off a special grocery order this afternoon. It pays extra. Sarah immediately agreed. Extra money was extra money. 45 minutes later, she loaded several bags into her car and followed the delivery address programmed into her phone. The route led her farther from town than expected, through winding roads lined with snow-covered trees, past private gates and sprawling estates. Eventually, she reached a property so large she checked the address twice to make sure she had not made a mistake. Towering iron gates slowly opened ahead of her. Sarah stared through the windshield. Who orders groceries from a place like this? She whispered, unaware that beyond those gates, 2 generations of the Harrison family were about to meet the woman who had quietly changed their lives. Sarah drove slowly up the winding driveway, her old sedan looking completely out of place among the luxury vehicles parked near the entrance. Snow-covered evergreens lined both sides of the property, and the mansion itself seemed to stretch endlessly across the hilltop. Large windows reflected the winter sunlight. Stone columns framed the entrance. Everything about the place felt like something from a movie rather than real life. Sarah parked near the service entrance and glanced at the delivery receipt again. The address was correct. Taking a deep breath, she climbed out and began unloading grocery bags. Before she reached the door, it opened unexpectedly. Robert stepped outside wearing a dark sweater and a surprised smile. Sarah? She froze. Robert? For a moment, neither spoke. Then realization swept across her face as she looked from him to the mansion behind him. You live here? Robert chuckled softly. I was wondering when that question would come. Sarah stared at him. You never mentioned any of this. You never asked. She wanted to be annoyed, but the amused look in his eyes made it impossible. I thought maybe you had a nice apartment somewhere. This is technically a very large apartment. Sarah laughed despite herself. Technically. Robert reached for several grocery bags. Come inside. It is freezing out here. The moment Sarah entered the house, she felt overwhelmed by the scale of everything. The ceiling seemed impossibly high. The staircase curved elegantly toward the second floor. A crystal chandelier sparkled overhead. Yet strangely, the home did not feel cold or intimidating. It felt lived in, comfortable. Family photographs lined several walls. Books filled shelves. A grand piano stood near the windows. This is incredible, Sarah admitted. Robert glanced around casually. After 30 years, you stop noticing. Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed from the far hallway. A tall man appeared carrying a tablet in one hand. He wore dark slacks and a simple navy sweater. No tie, no suit jacket. Yet something about him immediately commanded attention. He stopped the moment he saw her. Sarah noticed striking blue eyes. Calm posture. The quiet confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility. Robert smiled. Perfect timing. Ethan looked from his father to the unfamiliar woman standing beside him. I assume this is Sarah. Sarah blinked. You know who I am? Ethan smiled politely. I feel like I do. My father has talked about you for weeks. A faint blush touched Sarah's cheeks. Hopefully only good things. Nothing but. Ethan extended his hand. Ethan Harrison. Sarah shook it. The name felt vaguely familiar, but she could not immediately place it. Nice to meet you. Robert watched the exchange with obvious satisfaction. Ethan noticed immediately. You are enjoying this far too much. Absolutely. For the next 20 minutes, the three of them sat in the sunroom overlooking the snow-covered property. Sarah accepted a cup of coffee while Robert asked questions about Noah's latest soccer game. The conversation flowed naturally. Easy, comfortable. Yet Ethan found himself observing more than speaking. He noticed how Sarah never seemed impressed by the house. She asked questions about people rather than possessions. She spoke about Noah constantly. Every story somehow returned to her son. More importantly, she listened, really listened. Most people treated conversations like opportunities to talk about themselves. Sarah treated them differently. At one point, a housekeeper entered carrying fresh flowers. Sarah immediately stood and helped clear space on the table. The gesture lasted only seconds, small enough that most people would never notice. Ethan did. Later, as the housekeeper left smiling, he found himself strangely affected by the moment. Genuine kindness was becoming increasingly rare. Meanwhile, Sarah remained completely unaware of the impression she was making. She still had no idea that Ethan Harrison regularly appeared on magazine covers or that his company was worth billions of dollars. To her, he was simply Robert's son, a polite man who clearly cared about his father. As the afternoon sun began fading behind the trees, Sarah finally stood to leave. I should get back to Noah. Robert nodded. Tell him I expect a full update on the snow fort. I will. Ethan walked her toward the front entrance. Outside, snowflakes had begun drifting from the sky once again. Sarah paused near her car. Your father is a good man. Ethan looked toward the house, where Robert remained visible through the front window. He thinks the same thing about you. For reasons he could not explain, neither moved immediately. A brief silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just unexpected. Then Sarah smiled. Thank you for the coffee. Ethan smiled back. Thank you for stopping when everyone else kept walking. As Sarah drove away through the falling snow, Ethan remained standing near the entrance far longer than necessary. And for the first time in a very long time, he found himself looking forward to seeing someone again. The days that followed brought an unexpected rhythm into Sarah's life. Between work, Noah's school schedule, and the endless responsibilities that came with being a single parent, she somehow found herself exchanging more phone calls and messages with Robert and occasionally with Ethan. Nothing dramatic, nothing that felt unusual. Yet the connections grew naturally. One snowy evening, Sarah was helping Noah finish a science project at the kitchen table when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert's name. She answered with a smile. Let me guess. You are checking whether the volcano exploded. Robert laughed. Actually, I am calling because Ethan and I are having dinner tomorrow night, and Noah still owes me a demonstration of his engineering masterpiece. Noah immediately looked up from his project. Tell him I built a second volcano. Sarah relayed the message, causing Robert to laugh even harder. Across town, Ethan sat in the library listening to the conversation through the speakerphone. He found himself smiling before he realized it. There was something refreshing about the way Sarah and Noah filled a room with warmth without even trying. The following evening, Sarah and Noah arrived carrying the science project. Noah proudly explained every detail, while Robert listened like an investor hearing the next great business pitch. Ethan watched the interaction quietly. More than once, he noticed Sarah redirecting praise toward Noah whenever someone complimented her parenting. She never sought attention for herself. She simply focused on her son. As dinner ended, Robert excused himself to take a call from an old friend. For the first time, Ethan and Sarah found themselves alone in the sunroom. Snow drifted gently beyond the windows. A fire crackled nearby. Noah sat on the floor drawing pictures. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Sarah looked up. Sure. How do you stay positive? She blinked. That is a surprisingly serious question. Ethan smiled. I am serious. Sarah thought for a moment. I do not think positivity is the right word. Then what is? She glanced toward Noah. Responsibility. Ethan remained quiet. There are days when I am scared. Days when I am exhausted. Days when I wish things were easier. But Noah still needs breakfast. He still needs help with homework. He still needs someone cheering at his soccer games. So I keep going. Her answer settled into the room with surprising weight. Ethan had spent years listening to executives, consultants, and public speakers discuss leadership. Yet somehow this simple explanation felt more profound than most of them. Later that week, Robert quietly set a plan into motion. Without telling either Sarah or Ethan, he instructed his attorney to prepare a gift. $50,000. Enough to eliminate Sarah's immediate financial worries. Enough to repair the car, cover expenses, and create breathing room. She will never ask for help herself, Robert explained. Then perhaps we should offer it. 2 days later, a representative arrived at Sarah's apartment carrying an envelope. Inside was a letter and documentation for the gift. Sarah read the contents twice, then a third time. For several minutes, she simply stared at the papers. $50,000. More money than she had ever seen in one place. Her first thought was Noah. The opportunities. The security. The relief. Then another thought followed. By that evening, the envelope sat untouched on her kitchen table. The next morning, Sarah drove to the Harrison estate. Ethan happened to be arriving home from a meeting when he saw her vehicle pull into the driveway. Something about her expression immediately caught his attention. She stepped out carrying the envelope. Determined. Calm. Not excited. Not grateful. Determined. Robert met her at the front door. Sarah? She held out the envelope. I cannot accept this. Robert frowned gently. Why not? Sarah took a slow breath. Because helping someone is not a business transaction. The words landed with complete sincerity. No anger. No judgment. Just conviction. Ethan stopped walking. Several yards away, he remained frozen where he stood. Sarah continued. You became my friend. Noah cares about you. I care about you. None of that happened because I expected something in return. If I accept this, it changes something that should never change. Silence followed. Deep silence. Robert stared at her. Then slowly, a smile appeared. Not disappointment. Pride. Behind him, Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. In all his years surrounded by wealth, influence, and ambition, he had rarely witnessed a person walk away from something they genuinely needed simply to protect their principles. And in that moment, he realized his father had been right about Sarah all along. After Sarah returned the envelope, something subtle changed between all three of them. Not distance. Not awkwardness. If anything, the bond grew stronger. Robert seemed lighter than ever. Ethan found himself looking for reasons to stop by his father's house more often. And Sarah continued living exactly as she always had, completely unaware of the impact she was having on both men. A week later, Robert invited Sarah and Noah to a small charity luncheon hosted at a community center downtown. Nothing fancy, he promised over the phone. Just people trying to help other people. Sarah agreed immediately. That Saturday afternoon, the community center buzzed with activity. Volunteers distributed winter coats. Children decorated holiday cards. Families gathered around long tables filled with food and conversation. Sarah spent most of her time helping organize donated supplies, while Noah joined several other children building paper snowflakes. Robert watched the scene from across the room. Ethan stood beside him. Do you see it now? Robert asked quietly. Ethan followed his father's gaze toward Sarah. She was kneeling beside an elderly woman, helping her carry several bags toward the exit. No cameras. No recognition. No expectation of reward. Just helping. Again. Yes, Ethan admitted. I see it. Robert smiled. Most people reveal who they are when life is easy. Sarah revealed who she is when life was hard. Ethan remained silent. The words stayed with him long after the event ended. Later that evening, after Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat during the drive home, Sarah parked outside her apartment building and carried him upstairs. As she struggled with his backpack, someone stepped forward from the shadows near the entrance. Ethan, you startled me, Sarah said with a laugh. Sorry. He immediately reached for Noah's backpack. Let me help. Together they climbed the stairs. The building felt very different from the world Ethan usually inhabited. The paint was faded. The hallway lights flickered occasionally. Yet Sarah never seemed embarrassed by any of it. When they reached her apartment door, she turned toward him. You did not have to come all the way here. Ethan hesitated before answering. Maybe I wanted to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah smiled softly. Thank you. Ethan looked at Noah sleeping against her shoulder. Then at Sarah herself. Tired. Strong. Kind. Everything his father had described. And somehow more. Can I tell you something? He asked. Of course. Ethan glanced down the hallway before meeting her eyes again. The day you returned that money, my father was proud of you. Sarah looked surprised. Your father is too generous with compliments. No. Ethan shook his head. You do not understand. His voice softened. He spent months withdrawing from the world after losing so many people he cared about. Then one day a stranger sat beside him at a bus station. Sarah's expression changed. Ethan continued. You gave him something none of us could buy. Sarah felt emotion catch unexpectedly in her chest. I did not do anything special. Ethan smiled. That is exactly why you did. The following weekend, Robert invited them both to dinner once again. This time, however, something unexpected happened. As the meal ended, Robert stood and tapped his glass gently. Everyone looked toward him, including Sarah, including Ethan. There is something I have wanted to say for a long time. The room grew quiet. Robert looked directly at Sarah. His eyes reflected gratitude, affection, and something even deeper. The day we met, you thought you were helping a stranger. Sarah smiled. Because I was. Robert shook his head. No. You were helping a lonely old man who had forgotten what kindness looked like. Emotion filled his voice. You reminded me. Sarah blinked rapidly as tears threatened to form. Robert continued. For months, I watched how you treated people. Your son, your neighbors, complete strangers. Even when nobody was watching. He paused. That is why I knew. Sarah frowned slightly. Knew what? Robert glanced toward Ethan before returning his gaze to her. A warm smile spread across his face. That if my son ever opened his heart again, it would be because of someone exactly like you. Across the table, Ethan froze. Sarah stared at Robert in stunned silence. And for the first time, both of them began realizing that what had started at a cold bus station months earlier might have been leading somewhere neither had expected. For several seconds after Robert's words settled over the dinner table, nobody spoke. The crackling fireplace filled the silence. Snow drifted gently beyond the windows. Sarah felt completely unprepared for the emotion she saw in both men's eyes. Robert, she said softly, you are giving me far too much credit. The older man smiled. No, I am finally giving you the credit you deserve. Ethan looked down briefly before meeting her gaze again. There was no pressure in his expression, no expectation, only honesty, and somehow that made the moment feel even more meaningful. The weeks that followed brought small changes. Not dramatic ones, just quiet shifts that gradually became impossible to ignore. Ethan started calling more often, sometimes to check on Robert, sometimes to ask how Noah's latest soccer game had gone, sometimes with no real excuse at all. Sarah noticed it. So did Robert. One Saturday morning, Ethan surprised them both by showing up at Noah's soccer field carrying hot chocolate for everyone. The winter air was sharp and cold. Parents stood wrapped in blankets while children raced across the field. Noah spotted Ethan immediately. You came, he shouted. Ethan laughed. I heard there was a championship-level athlete playing today. Noah grinned and ran back toward his teammates. Sarah shook her head. You know he is going to expect you at every game now. That sounds like a commitment I can live with. The answer came so naturally that neither of them immediately realized what it revealed. By spring, the snow had disappeared. Trees began blooming throughout the city. Life felt different somehow. Lighter. Sarah's car had finally been repaired after months of careful saving. Noah's grades improved. Robert looked healthier than he had in years. And Ethan found himself spending less time at the office and more time with people who actually mattered. One warm afternoon, the four of them visited a community park near the river. Noah chased ducks along the shoreline, while Robert rested comfortably on a nearby bench. Sarah watched her son laughing beneath the sunlight. He is happy, she said quietly. Robert nodded. So are you. Sarah looked surprised. Am I? More than you realize. A few yards away, Ethan stood watching both of them. Robert followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. You should tell her. Ethan sighed. You enjoy interfering far too much. At my age, it is one of the few privileges left. Several weeks later, Ethan finally gathered the courage. There was no grand event, no expensive restaurant, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet evening on the porch of Robert's house while the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. Sarah sat beside him holding a cup of coffee. The world felt peaceful, simple, real. Ethan looked toward the horizon before speaking. Do you know what changed everything? Sarah smiled. I have a feeling you are about to tell me. A woman sitting beside a stranger at a bus station. Sarah lowered her eyes. That again. Yes, that again. His voice softened. Because if you had walked away that day, none of this would exist. Sarah remained quiet. Ethan turned toward her. I spent years building companies, solving problems, chasing goals. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how important ordinary kindness could be. He paused. Then you reminded all of us. Sarah felt tears gathering unexpectedly. Ethan reached for her hand. I do not admire you because of what you did once. I admire you because of who you are every day. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Somewhere nearby, Noah's laughter drifted across the yard while Robert pretended not to watch from the kitchen window. Sarah laughed through her tears. Your father planned all of this, did he not? Ethan smiled. Probably. Months later, Noah stood between them during another soccer game, holding both of their hands as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Robert watched from the sidelines, smiling quietly to himself. The crowd cheered. Children laughed. The sun shone brightly overhead. And in that ordinary moment, Sarah finally understood something important. The day she stopped to help a stranger, she thought she was saving one lonely man. She never imagined that simple act of kindness would lead her to a family she did not know she needed. Because sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with fanfare. They begin with a small choice, a moment of compassion, a decision to stay when everyone else keeps walking. And sometimes, that single choice changes everything.